Monday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.
Welcome back. Joe Molloy with you this Monday evening. Gordon D'Arcy is on the line. Evening, Gordon.
Good evening, Joe.
And Rory O'Connor is here in studio. Hello.
Hi, Joe. How's it going?
We had planned to discuss clean sweep in the Heineken Champions Cup, and somewhere around lunchtime, civil war has broken out in Irish rugby, it would seem. Prompted initially by a letter to the Department of Sport signed by 62 current and former Irish players, and then an IRFU response. That's what's happening. That's what's been happening today, rather.
Yeah, rather out of it's not really out of the blue, because there has been rumblings that there's some sort of unified stance will be taken at some stage, but it was a bit out of the blue today. Murray Kinsliff in the 42 got the letter initially and broke it, and kind of all hell has broken loose since. The version of the letter I've seen has 56 signatories. Murray has 62, but I only could go with the one that I had. But it's basically a who's who of Ireland's women's rugby in terms of current and former players in the last 10 years, excluding the kind of contracted sevens players who I believe weren't kind of involved in this. They were the players who signed the letter didn't want them to put them in an awkward position because they're IRFU employees. But you've the greats of the 2014 World Cup team, the 2013 Grand Slam team, the Fiona Coughlin's, Lynn Cantwell's, real heavyweights and really they were ahead of their time, that team, and they achieved so much. But you also have recently retired captain Ciara Griffin, Senna Noupu, Lindsay Peat, Cleena Maloney, who obviously took a stand during that last November international window. And it's a very, very strongly worded, pointed letter that says they have lost faith in the RFU's running of women's rugby. They've lost trust in it, and they want the government to step in and provide oversight for the reviews that are ongoing at the moment to make sure that there's transparency and that the findings are going to be implemented. And the RFU in the last hour or so have come out, and I think the word they use is they refute the letter. They're disappointed by the timing of the letter because there are 2 reviews ongoing. And what it paints a picture of an entirely dysfunctional relationship between the best players of the last decade, including the current best players in Ireland and in the Irish team, and the union, who are their own governing body. It's entirely dysfunctional. It looks like the government will have to step in and mediate to some degree. It's maybe not as powerful as the women's soccer team standing together at a table and having that press conference, but to get this number of players to sign this letter with such strong terms, like they didn't mince their words, they haven't pulled any punches, and then for the RFU to come out and reject their assertions, it's very unhealthy and points to a very, very sour relationship now.
I'm conscious lots of you listening have busy lives, so you may not have time to have read everything that was going on this afternoon. So just a quick summary. I'm going to blitz through the key points of this letter. It was to the 2 ministers in the Department of Sport, and as Rory's alluded to, the Irish players and former players say here: "We write to you as a deeply discouraged group of current and former Irish women rugby players, having sadly lost all trust and confidence in the IRFU." They have lost all trust and confidence in the IRFU. They mentioned the recent disappointments on the pitch. They say recent events simply reflect multiple cycles of substandard commitment from the union, inequitable, untrustworthy leadership. Untrustworthy leadership. These are big words here. Untrustworthy leadership, a lack of transparency, and an overall lack of ambition. They mentioned 2014 Irish team in a great place, and then following World Cup cycle, this triggered a new World Cup cycle, new leadership within Irish rugby with David Nucifora and Anthony Eddy overseeing the women's programme. The end of this cycle, bitter disappointment. They mentioned the World Cup in 2017, crashing out in the pool stages, so this prompted an action plan. However, we now find ourselves at the end of 2021, and those plans in disarray, with a large majority of those targets missed. They get on to the reviews then. Of the previous reviews, they say the IRFU were guilty of cherry-picking a handful of findings to present to the public. Many of us have felt that the range of stakeholders asked to take part in these reviews have not always reliably responded or represented the game. Neither, they say, do all of us feel fully confident that the information submitted has been factual or designed to act in the best interest of the women's game. So they don't feel that the information given to the reviews has been factual. Again, these are big, big claims. Of the current reviews, and there are 2 of them, we have no faith that in the end these will do anything significantly different to all those which have gone before. They have no faith in the current reviews. And as Rory mentioned, the point of the letter to the ministers: we ask that you meet with the RFU to confirm appropriate guarantees of meaningful change. We ask that you request oversight of the ongoing reviews. We want the recommendations of these reviews fully made available to the players. And they say many of us have been part of previous attempts via private intervention to work constructively with the RFU to help them understand how the players have felt over the years. These have failed, and so we feel we have to resort to requesting your help and to publishing this letter. So last resort territory. I'll give you the RFU statement in a moment, but Gordon D'Arcy, your reaction to that letter?
Yeah, kind of same as Rory. Wholly unsurprised by the content of it and the trajectory that this is taking. It's had to take. Like, I've been on the other side of the fence in the men's game, and there's an awful lot of resonance in this from when the game went professional in '95, and like I joined in '98, and there was a whole section of the RFU that just could not get their head around the fact that they were going to pay players to play rugby. And it was fight after fight after fight after fight, and eventually you start building down. You start getting some headway. You just get the tone from this letter that they've tried the nice approach, they've tried the engagement piece, they've tried this is what we need, this is what we do, and it just hasn't worked. Because the way I suppose they defend their allocation for the women's rugby is that they fund the senior team very well. And they do fund it reasonably well compared to their peers. So the two teams they would have lost to, the women's senior team would have a bigger budget than Scotland and Italy, and we lost to both of them. So that's and that's where they point the finger, saying, "No, listen, we give you plenty of money, you're just not winning." But there's a systemic issue in women's rugby, and the underinvestment in the women's game from grassroots is now. We see it at the international level. So I'm kind of delighted they have, because there's very, very little accountability in the IRFU, and there always has been. With who's responsible for what's their who are there, what's their job description, who's there. Like David Nusafora, it's been plenty of people have written that if he was being held on what you would think would be key performance indicators for his role, he wouldn't be receiving a new contract, but yet he is, and he's oversight of the women's rugby. So a lot of this arrow seems to be pointing back at him as well.
So the RFU statement then in response: the RFU is aware of a letter sent to the Minister for Sport re Irish Women's Rugby and refutes the overall tenor of the document, which questions the RFU commitment to and leadership of the women's game in Ireland. RFU say, it's disappointing that this group should choose now to come out with a series of allegations, given all involved in Irish rugby are fully aware that two well-resourced independent reviews are in train. And then they outline the details around those two reports. One, which looks into the more recent failings in not making the World Cup, and the second report is more to do with the overall structures in the game. They're both in train. And they finish off by pointing to some of the numbers involved in women's rugby across the country. So they mention 5,800 girls active across 68 under-14 girls teams. They have 64 under-16s girls teams, 56 under-18s teams, together with the 2,784 women playing across 81 adult women's teams. So the RFU, as Rory says, have not come out and said, oh, well, look, let's talk. They've come out and said, totally refuting the claims here. So, Rory, I think in terms of how this is going to play out, government response can be interesting. Naturally enough, we've invited all parties on, and nobody's willing to come out and talk just yet. Government response will be something. This on the day they handed over 19 million to the RFU due to the COVID situation. So just today it was announced. I mean, talk about bad timing from an RFU point of view. 19 million was handed over to the RFU today from the taxpayer. So government will have more leverage than it might otherwise have had in better times to say, well, we do need to get involved here. So there's that. And then specifically, I think it would be great if all of us knew, what are the RFU failing to do that they should be doing in terms of specifics? Is this about pathways? Gordon talked about investment. Specifically, are we talking investment in coaching? Is it in facilities? Because for the general public, when this bubbled up with the FAI a number of years ago, it was a very simple situation. our team is changing in toilets at airports and handing back tracksuits. This is an outrage. Gordon rightly says the senior team are well funded in terms of those very obvious short-term facilities. So when you get into words like strategy and pathways and developing players, that's where waters can be muddied. It's obviously very clear the women here are very serious people and they're very unhappy. But is there a succinct failing with some specifics we could put at the door of the IRFU here?
Well, I would also say that I struggle to look at that list of names and see what agenda those people would have other than wanting to improve the game. I don't see how they would materially benefit in any way from writing that letter today. So like for the RFU to come out in the way they did, when really they're trying to improve things, they've taken a nuclear action and they've hit the nuclear button and the RFU have hit them right back, you know. So, you know, it's hard to see where they're coming from other than to try and improve things, and they haven't been listened to. They've basically had the door shut in their face again. Once you get into this part of it, it becomes quite boring. It's a little bit like the post John Delaney FAI structural stuff when suddenly the kind of champagne football stuff went away and it was all about kind of the committee level stuff. And it's modernising, professionalising with probably a small P rather than a large P, and just making it more elite at all levels, so that a 10-year-old girl has the same opportunities to thrive as a rugby player in 10 years' time as a 10-year-old boy does. And right now there's no under-20s team for the women's in the women's game. There's no academy. You know, like, you know, if a boy from Dublin is very good at rugby, he has a chance of getting into the Leinster Academy, and that will improve his skill set onwards. Whereas, you know, a girl doesn't have this defined pathway in. It depends what club she plays for. It depends whether she's spotted and brought into an AIL club. The AIL has 4 strong teams, and then the rest of the league is not on anywhere near the same level. You've got 142 nil scorelines this year. You've got some clubs following the same model as the English league and having kind of almost professional programs, and then you have other clubs who are very much amateur and participation based. So you have the structure of the RFU. Most of the women's game is under the participation side of the house, so it's committees, it's volunteers, but including the AIL, which is where not all of our internationals, but a lot of our internationals play. Whereas the national team and the sevens program fall into the elite side of the house alongside the professional game. I think what really ultimately needs to happen is you get a women's department headed up by someone like Lynn Cantwell, who does that job in South Africa and is excellent, like one of the most impressive people in Irish sport. And you take women's rugby out of Anthony Eddy's world, you keep him underneath David Nusafora, but you say Lynn Cantwell is your director of women's rugby, and she has full oversight into the structures and the pathways, over the competitions that the senior players play in, and over the national team and Greg McWilliams' side, and allocates resources accordingly. At the moment, it's falling between all sorts of stools. It's volunteer-led on one stage. People who are on those committees are not necessarily, like, some of them are coming from clubs who don't have senior women's teams. They're on the women's committee, on the women's AIL committee. Some very well-meaning good people, but they're not qualified to run what should be an elite side of the house. And ultimately, our rivals in other countries, England's taking off. You know, like they've got a BBC are showing a game every weekend for the rest of the league season. They're getting good numbers through the doors. Their national team, who Ireland were beating 10 years ago, are hammering New Zealand. You know, like it'll be too late, but by the time things get fixed, at the way things are currently being handled. So there's loads in it, but I think what really would benefit from is for one person to have a department that just runs the women's game, takes the participation element out of it. You know, that you get the handle on the good players, and you can kind of have some control over how they develop over the years, and that would make them. I don't think the players feel valued, certainly when they're playing for their clubs. I cannot see how
Anthony Eddy stays in a role here. Like, his position is completely untenable now. He is part of the problem, and if you're talking from a cultural perspective within a team, how can he be left in that role? And even as Joe, as you were talking there, and you were talking about some stats that the IRFU were talking to say, this is our partition piece. Like, they're taking credit for other people's work there in large part. If you go to like any of the clubs, they have participation numbers because of community in that club. And that's the only reason. It's not through any sort of strategy or anything like that. The RFU currently don't particularly invest in the men's club game. You know, what chance are you looking at a coordinated approach into the women's game, even though it would arguably be easier and cheaper to fix?
According to, I mean, like David Nucifor's position should really be, you know, if 60 or 50 or 60 Irish men's players wrote a letter like this about the state of the men's game, you would think the performance director would be under pressure. So I don't see why he wouldn't be, and Anthony Eddie definitely is. Maybe I'm just so beaten down by dealing with them over the years that I just don't see these people being under any real threat, and you see the RFU response. But like, this is such an indictment of the people running the game in this country. I mean, if these people have the best interests of the game at heart, the players, not to say the RFU don't, but these people don't come at it with an agenda, and they've gone this far for a reason. Like, they should be, rather than coming out attacking the players for writing the statement, they should be looking at what is wrong with their own organisation, that the people who they're supposed to represent feel this way about it.
Yeah. Well, Anthony Eddie and David Nucifor would, I'm sure, firmly argue their position is not untenable and they've been working in the best interest of the IRFU. What is certainly clear is they are under now serious scrutiny, serious pressure. That's going to come from the general public, that's going to come from the media, and I would think it's going to come from the Department of Sport.
Yeah.
So, Gordon, I would put it to you, their only way out of this, Gordon, is one, to make a hell of a public presentation and to outline their strategies, and that's a very difficult thing to do. Primarily what they're going to have to do is sit down with a good bunch of those 62 signatories and lay out the plan to their satisfaction, so that those trusted voices in Irish rugby can come out of the room and say, we've listened to what the RFU have presented, we're happy with this going forward. That's the only way I think the RFU settle this in a satisfactory manner.
I'm not going to do a Gary Lineker on it and say I'll sit here in my underwear if that happens, but something similar to it.
But they have no option, surely. They have no option, surely. Listen, or the word untenable will be used.
Somebody's head's going to go, but and you're right. Anthony Eddie and David Nucifor, of course, are going to sit there and say what the problem I have with all this is the vacuum of information. So, what have they done different to their predecessors to develop the game and to say this is where we are going? Like, throwing out statistics of that is saying, oh, our participation number has gone up, and saying, well, that's because a club might have just recruited, or someone might have seen Davine Parsons play. Like, it could be nothing to do with anything you have done. What tangible plans have been put in place over the last this isn't unique to sport. This is business. If you were in any company, you say, what have you done in a leadership position? How have you helped to grow a company? How have you helped to grow women's rugby in the last 4 or 5 years that you've been here? There, like, that absence of the thing, and it's the same with Nucifor. They're going, since you've been here, what have you done? You've moved players around. That hasn't worked. You've moved players in provinces, that hasn't worked. You've retained players, but that's never been an issue in Ireland. We've always retained players. And you've brought back a sevens programme. But so what else? What's different in Irish rugby today than 7 years ago? Yeah.
So to state an obvious point, listening to you don't rate the job either of those two men have done, let's put it frankly.
I use the same answer. I'd say one of the reasons why this this letter exists is the lack of transparency. Like, what is, like, you know, what to say? That's like a lovely broad statement. What was been that strategy piece? What has been the plan for women's rugby for the last 5 or 6 years? Yeah. And has it been met? Has it not been met? If it hasn't been met, we understand why. Is it down to an individual thing? Is it down to funding? What it is? But we don't, like, we've no element, we've no line of sight on these. And yeah, from looking from the outside in, which is I can just look at what's happening on the pitch. So you talk, Roy, exactly one of the points I was going to make. You have 110-0 score lines. You have girls playing in pitch. I can be very careful how I say this. This is not a man commenting on women's skill levels in sport, but kickers that can't reach the touchline because they've never been shown properly how to kick, or they can't connect with the ball strong enough to make the conversions a genuine attempt. Like, that comes down to the first contact you have when you start teaching girls how to kick a ball in the same way a boy would have afforded those things. So you're looking at the actual what's happening on the pitch. and it's not good. And now we're seeing the actual manifestation of it at the elite level, and it's crumbling down around it. And they're still, and they have the funding. Now they just don't have the players. So something is wrong there. So to me, that goes back to the people who make the decisions.
Okay, well, we'll have to see how this all plays out. I suppose last word to you, Rory, on it, and we'll move on to the weekend's action. Gordon talks about on the outside looking in. All we get really on the outside looking in terms of strategy is the review is published, but according to the 62 signatories there, it's cherry-picked, a few points thrown out into the public. There are some aims for the next 4 years, and then we all have to, in 4 years' time, have to go back and check what were even the aims from 4 years ago. But in terms of, this is the plan, this is how we think we're going to hit it in terms of both numbers and achievement on the pitch and numbers of coaches working with 7-year-olds. We never see any of that.
No. What we get is we get brought into a room with the person who's written the review, or the person David is for usually. He has his hand on the report, but we never actually get to see what the report is, and he tells us what he thinks the findings of the report were. Okay. And that's what's happened in the last two Men's World Cup reviews when Ireland missed their targets at both times.
Sorry to interrupt you. A key point is this letter from the players is saying, we think factually incorrect evidence is being given to this report. We think they're talking to the wrong people. We think the reports are basically a waste of time, let alone them not being published. But actually, in the first place, they're saying we don't.
I think there's a lot of faith in Amanda Bennett, who's putting together the World Cup review, because she's coming from the outside. She's well respected, and I think getting someone independent, I think there is merit in that. The only thing is, Anthony Eddy's already told us what he thinks happened at the World Cup, and they've replaced the coach already. So even if Amanda Bennett's findings, they've already made decisions before this report comes out about the World Cup. So, they've kind of preempted whatever she finds in the World Cup report. The wider review is going to touch every element of the game. It's just reports after reports after reports. I mean, the problems are there. You don't really need a report to necessarily see it. You need to bring some.
You would have been on that call with Nusafor after the 2019 World Cup. Yeah. And I don't know who asked the question and said, who's seen the report? And the contemptuous answer back was the people who need to. And the follow-up question was, who are they? I said, the people who need to see it. And it was just battered away. It was like, what are we doing here? This is government money, this is club money, this is player. This is a not-for-profit run company that players, fans it's like transparency. It's mind-blowing.
No, I get that. Look, they might argue even on that point, and I'm trying to play devil's advocate a little bit. We felt it would be hugely divisive to throw that out to the public in great detail, and look where we are now. Look where the men's team are now. So can you not trust us a little bit? I'm sure that'd be their argument back on that point. But it's clearly not working on the pitch for the women.
The success of the 4 provinces in the men's side of the game and the national team covers up every crack that they have in that organisation. And yet this is starting to seep in. The weekend New Zealand game, this was the big story. We normally would be waxing lyrical about Munster. This is damaging the brand. And they have to be seeing that. And their statement has only exacerbated the point that they've poured petrol on the fire by going at these women again. They need, if they just. I think there's money out there for it as well. I think there are brands willing to get involved in a successful women's rugby side of the house. And they can learn from the mistakes of that era, Gordon's. I don't think these are that difficult to fix if they can just put the right resources behind it. And then it can be a good news story. Look at the FAI and how much good credit they're getting off the women's team and the pay deal that they struck and the Sky deal and the fact that they're winning again and they're getting crowds and their crowds are building. That's the most positive. I mean, Stephen Kenny thing's going well as well, but the FAI are getting positive PR, and that's an organisation that doesn't traditionally get positive PR. Yeah. Whereas the RFU, who have traditionally get good PR, are getting an absolute kicking over something that's completely within their control to fix. These are all their own goals.
What worries me is the RFU, an organisation. Where would they be without the school system in the men's game? I wonder. They don't have a track record of bringing through elite teams.
And that's one of the problems.
I've been saying this for I don't know how long. Yeah. If you take the school system out of the men's game, you couldn't select from them, and I know that's not reality. We do have it. We would end up the men's game would end up in the same place as the women's game, because there is no connection from the AIL. Nusafor doesn't want anything to do with the AIL. It's not part of the elite of the professional game. So even though it represents the biggest playing population in Ireland, so go figure.
Clock's against us. I suspect we'll be returning to this. We have been on to the RFU. We were on to a number of the players who I think want to just let their statement speak for itself, and we were in touch with the Department of Sport, so we'll continue to invite various stakeholders on. On the pitch, what a great weekend for Irish rugby. Things couldn't be better. Clean sweep. Bonus points for Leinster, bonus point for Connacht at home to Bath and Stade Francais respectively. Ulster won in Claremont on Saturday night, first win on French soil since 2016. And then Munster, look at all the talent coming through in Coventry. Which game did you go to?
I was in Munster. Yeah,
okay, well,
yeah, I was
maybe that's the place to start.
My first away trip since the pandemic, so
Okay.
I'm just back from Coventry.
Wasps 14, Munster 35. I think, I'm not sure where I saw it, but I did see across both teams a combined 59 players ruled out of this fixture. So in terms of analysing this and drawing conclusions, you're on thin ice, I would suspect. Wasps, even on the morning of the game, had to declare 5 changes. 2 second rows gone, back row gone. They lost their number 10, Jimmy Goppert had to jump in, and they lost a player from the bench as well. So Munster were massively up against it. We talked about that in advance of the game. Wasps were too, and we saw kind of, I mean, the couple of minutes around the Wasps try on 30 minutes or so.
Yeah.
There was a certain frenetic energy to the game, which made it fun to watch in its own way. But geez, did it turn up beautifully for Munster in the end. This is extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean, Wasps still have 15 experienced players on the pitch. Like, there was no debutants in the Wasps team. They had all played an amount of Premiership rugby. Some of them were internationals. They probably didn't have the calibre of player that Munster had in terms of O'Mahony, Byrne, Conor Murray, Keith Earls. You know, like, Munster could call on lines, whereas Wasps had 15 solid pros. But I think the Munster performance was still remarkable, despite the fact that it was against, I mean, even when it was 15 on 15, their scrum struggled really, really badly, but in every other element of the game, they stood up and were counted for. And I thought a couple of players really fed off the challenge and fed off, like, rose to it. You know, they could have been bitching and moaning at training for the last 2 weeks that the rest of the team weren't there and they had to play with these kids. They didn't. I genuinely think it was probably Peter O'Mahony's, maybe the All Blacks game in 2018. I thought it was Peter O'Mahony's best game I've ever seen him live. I thought he was absolutely brilliant. He looked young again. He, you know, that counter attack you're talking about when he fed off Campbell's bravery and suddenly he's thrown, you know, long passes out of his own 22. Tyburn was immense. You know, Murray stood up. I thought Keith Earls stood up. It was just really impressive to see the way they went about it. And the 6 young guys who started, you know, James French struggled at the scrum, but apart from that, they all had really good games. Like Scott Buckley, he looks like he could play against Cast this week. He looks like he's got the size. His line out went well, scored a try. Campbell looks brilliant. You know, a little bit raw. Okeke looked like CJ Stander at times.
Great, yeah.
Yeah, no, right. Like, you know, so you've got this contingent of players who've all jumped a couple of places in the queue in the last week, and the interesting is, like, what are they going to do with them this week. But I thought it was a really impressive performance. It wasn't perfect by any means, but a couple of players really, really played well. And to go to Wasps and get a bonus, whatever about winning the game, but to get a bonus point and win it pulling up. And Wasps, like, it was probably a harsh red card, but it's still like one of the most experienced players got himself sent off. So you can't just wave that away. Like, that was an act of a little bit reckless from Bad Shields. So that was part of the game. You know, that was really impressive. There was a huge Munster contingent over there in the crowd. They really got behind them. It really seems like they've bought into this idea of the backs against the wall, and I think it sets them up very well for the rest of the campaign now, whereas it could have been really derailing.
Oh, it could have. There was a bit of old school Munster folklore about the day. It had that old European feel, didn't it, an English ground, and 3 players off the bench from Ennis, which wouldn't be a traditional stronghold. So that's a real fillip, I would think, for the province, and that it reassures everyone, well, there's some good work being done behind the scenes here, because I think there was a feeling maybe Munster had stagnated in recent years. Same faces, same ceiling at certain stages of the competition. So what a day to almost rejuvenate the whole thing, and who knows how many come through and have great careers into the future. But there's a sense of, hang on, there's a bit of cause for optimism here, and when the big names go, there are more on the way, which would be what you associate with Leinster, I suppose, more so than Munster. Gordon, what were your big takeaways?
Joey Carberry was just...
Well, you're just on a downer all night tonight, aren't you?
No. It was like on everything he did with the ball in hand was just sublime.
I thought you were talking about the injury. Well, so he was doing his thing.
That just ruined it for me. I was just watching it. I was like, oh, he's back. He's found us. It's the first time I've seen him in tempo with the game, and he was controlling and pulling the strings. Right. He was moving, had all the options, ready to pull the strings, and it just looked easy and effortless for him. And you were just like, yeah, he's found it's clicked for him, and it was Munster were feeding off the back of it. There were so many threats from Munster. Tyburn just was, driving the tempo of the game. And I love that they just broke off the shackles, and and they went for it. Like, it did help they had 6 internationals and a full international backline. And Wasps, I think this is not one of the, I'd say that I wouldn't be as say this is one of the ages for Munster. Wasps were dreadful. They were really, really dreadful. You could see their performance mirrored, I'd say, the amount of preparation they put into this. And that's taking nothing away from the Munster win. But I think we do have to put a big asterisk beside and say Wasps were really, red card, yellow card the second half. They were kind of, they didn't, once that happened, you could see that any sort of fight just evaporated from them. But Munster still had to play, and they still had to go after it. And some lovely plays like Pat Campbell, he only had 7 involvements and 3 of them were line breaks. Just lovely to see. Players, like, he had Keith Earls outside him for his try. A 19-year-old not passing the ball I really liked that, because it was just there. He just went for it, and holding it at 7. It's like going like this is what everybody's been talking about with this kid, and you're just like going, he's a real pain in the bum, number 7. Lovely turnovers, killed momentum for Wasps when they'd full players and things. So it was enough for them. And actually, to pick on your point, Joe, I don't think we would have seen these players this season.
No.
With the current kind of selection process. And it's been great to see them, because now they're kind of going this little, forced hand to the coaches, but it's basically going, hey coach, you can trust me. Which is nice for these guys. They've got to find Jack Crowley or Ben Healy and go, listen, you've only got 60 minutes of rugby this season, but let's get you into the pressure room now straight away.
Well, there's a good chat with Alan Quillen from yesterday on our social channels if you want more Munster talk. I'm going to keep things moving because the clock's against us. So much to discuss today, you'll appreciate. On Leinster Bath, I'll come to you on the Montpellier situation in a moment, Rory, but Leinster 45, Bath 20. So, Gordon, look, people tuned into this, I think, expecting this would be a rout. There were 4 tries after about 25 minutes. There were 7 by about the hour mark, none in the final quarter. Things got quite sloppy. Leo Cullen is not agitated in recent weeks, but just there's a nagging sense in a lot of his post-match comments that things aren't quite clicking. So he says, in terms of putting together an 80-minute performance, we're still a bit off. It's just something we're conscious of. It's just trying to get the group together. And he mentioned the disruption of November. We lacked control. Some of that comes down to us as coaches making some changes early, which creates a bit of disruption around that cohesion part. And cohesion is a word he's used a lot, I think, over the last number of weeks. Do you read much into a sloppy final Leinster quarter, or is it like the game's done? Who cares? I mean, most people have clicked off anyway.
I guess, it doesn't bite you till it does. There's no, I suppose there's from a mental perspective, you're kind of looking at it going, what you want is from a coach, you want them to come on and the team to play seamlessly, and they should. All the natural characteristics they have, you expect them to be able to kick on. It didn't happen. Everything got disrupted. Pace dropped off a little bit at the breakdown. And it just descended into chaos, partly because Bath are just, again, like, it's not even 1 foot out the door, they're 2 feet out the door by that stage. That doesn't hurt them at this stage in the season. But, going to Montpellier now this weekend, you would expect it's going to be a fully loaded Montpellier team.
I'll stop you there, actually, because 4 COVID cases in Montpellier is the latest I've seen. Yeah, I know. It never ends. Yeah.
Leinster have suspended their training today as well.
Correct,
so,
yeah. So
who knows?
I mean,
what happens if both teams can't feel a team? Do you get a 28-all draw?
I'd say they're almost kind of waiting on the other one to call it. Like, if you have that situation, that there's actually a tactic here now where you have to
we're fine, we can play.
Exactly. There really has to be a bit of brinksmanship, because that, I mean, even if, like, Leinster will probably get through regardless of what happens this weekend, but you want to be the top seed, because you get home all the way to the final if you're the top seed. So this is high stakes.
The latest is both have cancelled training today. Montpellier, 4 cases, 2 players, 2 staff members. They lost to Exeter at the weekend, and they've had 2 players test positive since. Leinster, we're hearing 3 senior players as well as a member of staff positive, and raft of testing as we speak here on Monday evening. And I think both coaches, a bit like Ronan O'Gara last week, will be going into the office tomorrow saying, who is it now? Where are we? So that's the latest.
Yeah, it is, and I'd say there's a major doubt over this fixture at this stage. I mean, it's all
Friday evening as well.
It's Friday night. Yeah, I'm going. So I'd like to know before Friday morning if anyone could arrange that before I actually fly to France. But the it's really undermining the whole thing, unfortunately. Like as you said, there was 59 players absent from the Wasps game. I know they weren't all COVID, but there was, I think, 7 of the 12 games of the weekend were affected by COVID in one form or another. There was players out, and it's just really, I mean, I know Man United cancelled training is not just a unique rugby problem at the moment, and it does seem to be getting everywhere and very hard to keep the bubbles intact. Players have kids in school and kids in creche and all of that as well. It's dangerous. It's a dangerous time for these fixtures, and because the competition has no wiggle room in terms of refixtures, it just threatens. I mean, it kind of brought the whole thing down last year, and they ended up kind of just fast tracking everyone into a last 16. I don't know what they're going to do this year.
Group stages are falling apart. Group stages fell apart last year. They're falling apart this year. Yeah. Really, it's like a filtering to get to the last 16, isn't it?
Yeah, I absolutely. Yeah. Our rugby coverage is with thanks to Vodafone, sponsors of the Irish team of us, everyone in. We have virtually no time. So Ulster, and we'll do a bit more on this on Wednesday, is the best solution, and Connacht. Ulster go to Claremont, they win 29 points to 23. Connacht beat Stade at home.
James Hume was amazing.
Bonus point. Well, I was going to say, I'll let you dictate the talking points. So they were 16-0 up if people didn't see this game. And JJ Hanrahan to the fore. Claremont came back and went 20 points to 19 up, and all of us watching at home in our warm living room said, well, that's that Ulster rather, good try. And then Nick Timoney pops up with a try, and Ulster have a famous win, and they have Northampton, who looked fairly insipid on Friday against Racing, coming to Belfast. So suddenly Ulster really have to be looking at knockout stages here, Gordon. What you mentioned James Hume. What else do you want to tell us about this?
James Hume, John Cooney, you're looking at John Cooney and you're kind of going, geez, what could this guy bring to off the bench for change of tempo or continue a tempo with Ireland? Has to get a look in. He's like, it should be a straight 2-horse race with him and Gibson Park at this stage.
They've written him off. Like Cooney's.
Oh, you could. It's such a shame. He is like, if you like. It's a shame that we have to put a name on this. We have to unstructured rugby is what happens when somebody makes a line break. Hume, McCluskey creating line break after line break, and then you just want good players just to pick up the ball, run, and try and get a try. It's the simplest part of rugby. And Hume he's just brilliant. They have to find a way to get him into the team in Six Nations if he continues this form. So I just thought he was just the way this back line for Ulster is just phenomenal. Like Balakoon, Lowry is when you're playing that high tempo, it doesn't even have to be front foot, but they're playing when they're playing with off those line breaks. These guys are just so dangerous. There's still just a tiny question marks around the tight 5. Will they have a tight 5 to deliver their kind of back row and outside backs a shot at something? This is where they go to. They get to. They could do well at this time. They just have to find a way to win games that matter in the knockouts. But yeah, these guys will get. They're already into the next round. You would assume. But they were lovely. They're great value to watch, and that's they're playing the way rugby you want. Mismatches, players going for it, not really caring if it's on, if it's not on. It's lovely.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question we don't have time for? I'm going to get killed here. We may have to edit this out of the radio version, understandably. I watched Northampton against Racing. This is why we don't have time for this in the actual radio edit. I watched Northampton Racing, and just with a view to Northampton coming to Belfast, and continually, and the BT commentary were bemoaning this. In effect, imagine Racing in possession and Northampton defensive line seems very narrow, and they all rush up, and Racing still have time to throw a little pass over the top out to the wings, and Racing are in again and again and again and again. Like, I'm not saying I'm Sean Edwards, but even I would have said this is not working. Can you explain to me the logic of what Northampton were trying to do there?
No, because that's, and again, I'm going to be like, the English teams are, how much effort they're putting into this, I don't really know. Okay. That to me is lack of preparation. So players coming in who haven't really trained, who haven't really drilled, because obviously the wing has to stay back for that kick now. So the ability to rush up like that is, it's bad. Maybe it's just poor preparation, and like when you're getting pumped on the field as well, players start doing what they drift back to what their individual preference might just do, and they go look for the big hit. But when you've got players of the caliber of Finn Russell now, are they really making that decision, or is Russell put them into the position where they can do nothing else? So there's the space in behind for the kick, there's the long ball over the top, or he can hit it. So he's got so many options. The defender has to pick one, or he does nothing. And then Russell is so good, he just picks it around it. So with those high up defenses, it's either all in and the big, it's big in, you leave the space in behind and make them kick it there. But if you're going up with wings back, you're just like, that's, to me, that is complete lack of preparation. And that seems to be fairly consistent with some of the teams that are just like, yeah, this isn't a priority for us.
Okay, well, they're in Belfast Friday. And before we go, Rory, I think everybody would really love Connacht to make knockout stages. Perfect start, 36 points to 9. They have Leicester next Sunday, 1 o'clock. Leicester won in Bordeaux. So, perfect start, Connacht.
Yeah, Leicester are very good, but with this competition, the way it's structured now, there's a real chance for Connacht to, win their home games, and they probably get out of the pool, pick up a couple of bonus points along the way. And if they play the way they did against Stade, they're giving themselves a chance every week. I think Leicester will kind of be Connacht's kryptonite. They're a very physical team and very structured and very well coached by Steve Borthwick. But there's a real chance there. And to beat Stade Francais and score that number of points and play with such positivity, when they're on song, they're great to watch. And those players are really playing for Andy Friend at the moment. So it's impressive.
Okay, well, next Sunday's the big one. Fellas, we're just so far out of time. We've got to wrap up. Gordon D'Arcy, thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. And Rory O'Connor, thanks for coming to the studio.
No worries, Joe. Thanks, Gordon.
Monday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.